যদি সবাই ফিরে যায়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায়, যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায়, তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি আলো না ধরে, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে, যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে, তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে, আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে।
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. The audio is coming fine, right? Yeah. Hello. Yes, the audio is fine. So now we are back after 15 minutes. We are going to now discuss this new book called Dharmanomics by someone called Sriram Balasubramanian. I think this is a re-release. It had released years back from some more costlier, I think more a legit publication, which is why I found some copies of it which cost about 1,000, 2,000 rupees, and now it costs a little more reasonable, just like any other pop books you buy these days. I'm curious about this because I read some interesting passages from it, and Sanjeev Sanyal has endorsed the book. I think he went to the launch of this book. So let's see what this idea is about. Is it, again, socialism with Sanskrit words, or is it something actually that will help the country? You have seen the light, yes. Ms. Early live stream, yeah, do check it out. You'll like it. Srijan, Joy Makali, Nave Vimarsh, Jai Sriram, Boss Don, hi, Rishi, Jai Bhairav Baba, Jai Bhairav Baba. Let's start.
Dharmanomics. I like the term. You coined this word, Dharmanomics and dharmic capitalism.
There's an entire ecosystem around the temple, right? In terms of, say, shops, in terms of tourism, in terms of people coming, even today in many of the villages, right? I mean, most of the villages, especially in southern India, the central sort of engine of economic apparatus is a major temple. There's a reason why a lot of the temples, major temples in Bharat even today, are all within, say, an hour and a half from the coastal line, because these temples were serving as banks and financial institutions.
Yeah, this is the stuff I know from Sanjeev Sanyal's books, and this is what I was talking about with, I think we'll do the next live stream on that only. Mystery Sociologist has recommended one video to do a live reaction on, which is Ash Sarkar, that famous British Bangladeshi Muslim girl who is very, very far left, and who debated me for a while based on one or two tweets with me on Twitter, which gave me a large following. So she recently hosted William Dalrymple, okay, and there they discussed the greatness of ancient India, etc. So they have a very distinct agenda to it, I think, which we will discuss in that live stream. But there again, almost everything that William Dalrymple was talking about, I know of those things from Sanjeev Sanyal's book Land of Seven Rivers. He wrote that book when? In 2011 or 12 something, right? Or 2010. Because Ocean of Churn came out in 13. Ocean of Churn came out in 2016. I think Land of Seven Rivers came out sometime between 11 and 13, okay. So everyone used to say, of course, it did have some respect in some people's eyes for a while, because Sanjeev Sanyal used to get invited to literature festivals and stuff. He had a pretty liberal circle and stuff, but they didn't know that these stupid Hindutwadis, these lathi-wielding Hindutwadis, all of a sudden will start reading books and will talk about what happened in the past and not just demand banning of films and stuff. They were caught napping, of course. Remember that famous article by Ramchandra Guha that where are the right-wing intellectuals? So be careful what you wish for, bro. But then I gift Land of Seven Rivers to a friend of a commie friend, to a commie friend of a commie friend, who my friend is not commie anymore. But I showed Land of Seven Rivers to him. He gifted it to a commie friend of his, and that guy read 4 pages of the book and threw it away, saying it's RSS history, RSS manufactured history of India. Now William Dalrymple is coming up with those same things, and we are going to do a live reaction of that book. And what Mr. Balasubramanian here said, his name is Balasubramanian, right? So this stuff also we know. This is common knowledge among Hindutva youth now in Hindutva circles, but all this was, I think, first pointed out by Sanjeev Sanyal. But I got very pissed off listening to that discussion between Ash Sarkar and William Dalrymple, because one thing William Dalrymple kept saying was, nobody talks about this, nobody knows this, we never knew of this. So how did Sanjeev Sanyal know about this? How did he come across it? How did he stumble upon it? Who was stopping you from stumbling upon it? You had your own agenda back then, no? अब बोल रहे कि देखो ये सब इतिहास हमसे छुपाया गया है, विलियम डालरिम्पल भी बोल रहा है और एश सरकार मान भी रही है.
To enable commerce.
Wealth creators being demonized globally. Is that a healthy trend? Are they villains of society?
Wealth creation is something that one needs to encourage, because without wealth creators, you don't get prosperity. Let's go back again to Kautilya, right? He saw economics as a tool to retain political power, because he believed in the view that wealth creators enhance society, enhance employment, enhance capital, enhance labor, and they make the society far more prosperous. Prosperity with welfareism, right? To ensure that, the poor are not left behind.
Acha.
Namaste, Jai Hind. You're watching or listening to another edition of the ANI podcast with Smita Prakash. My guest today is Sriram Balasubramanian, US-based
that was first pointed out by Sanjeev Sanyal,
author and economist,
in Land of Seven Rivers only,
whose areas of interest include macroeconomics and economic history. He's out with his new book, Dharmanomics. His earlier book, Kautilyanomics for Modern Times, is a scholarly look on
ए भाई, मेरा कॉइन किया हुआ जोक किसने अपने नाम रख लिया? कौन हो तुम? अलग अलग लाइव स्ट्रीम्स पे कौन से नाम से आते थे? बोलो, show yourself.
Astra. We will discuss what dharmic capitalism is, and also his take on whether Trump's promises on the economy front won him the election. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast, Sriram.
Thank you.
2 books, Dharmanomics and Kautilyanomics. Interesting play of words. I like it. So I want to know about the latest book, of course, Dharmanomics. It's a speed read, actually. You can finish it in a couple of days, or even in a day, actually, you can read it. Very interesting, especially for people who are watching from Singapore, Southeast Asia. If you live in Thailand, if you live in Vietnam, you live in Singapore, as I said, or Indonesia, do read this. People in South
Is he a long-term friend of Sanjeev Sanyal? Acha, so did he learn of these things from Sanjeev Sanyal in a evening alcohol party or what? Singapore bros make Singapore great again. Singaporean Indians making India great again.
India, you can see the linkages. Very interesting, and reading this book. What I want to ask you, Sriram, is that after Kautilyanomics for Modern Times, which the foreword is by Bibek Debroy, the late Bibek Debroy, and Dharmanomics. I like the term. You coined this word, Dharmanomics and dharmic capitalism.
Yeah, polymerist. He is not as rabid towards Sanjeev Sanyal as other people had started becoming. Then Sanjeev Sanyal became a big shot in the government. So again, people stop being rabid towards him. But Dalrymple did host a panel where Sanjeev Sanyal was a guest in Jaipur Literature Festival. But it's tough to forget what Dalrymple did in the Monica Arora book. Writing letters to a publisher saying that don't print a book. What the fuck, bro? If as a writer you don't believe in free speech, tab aur kisko sikhaya?
So can you break down these terms for us, for our readers and viewers and watchers?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yes, Rishabh, we just started.
For having me in the show. I'm a big fan of your show. I watch most of your episodes, even though some of them are many hours long. But anyway, so thank you for having me here. The entire series of my research, it's a trilogy of books. The first part of it is Kautilyanomics, where I deal with 3rd century BC, basically the Arthashastra. I spent at least 4 or 5 years working on the Arthashastra and creating an economic framework, because most of the text on the Arthashastra, the translations are all on the political side of it. The Chanakya Niti that we talk about. but essentially it's called Arthashastra for a reason, right?
Economics.
Yeah, because the Artha, the wealth creation that we're talking about, is something, the core, is the essence of the text. So I try to.
सिंगापुर में बैठ के सब इंडियंस अर्थशास्त्र पढ़ते हैं क्या? अजीब, पूरा एक साउथ इंडियन संजीव सन्याल है ये.
Create a framework based on the text called dharmic capitalism. Basically, Kautilya's principle of dharma. Of course, dharma has like many definitions. It's a multi-dimensional word, very difficult to translate. But for the narrow view of economic policy, I define it through the prism of ethics, responsibilities, and social harmony. So these are sort of three components of the definition of dharma, and these map into things like institutions, clean administration, and they map to other constituents, which I show in the book. And eventually, the output that we call about is three buckets that I see. One is a role of a state, which is quite strong, rule enforcing, yet doesn't micromanage. So, for example, if there is, say, trading between the both of us, let's say you're trading a particular good and I'm with me, there are certain rules which are set. If you violate the rules, obviously,
Right.
Kautilya is going to, sort of punish you and give you the whatever punishments that's required.
Fair enough. That's the minarchist way of doing things: protection of life, liberty, and property, enforcing contracts. M. Shastri is saying when you don't have to commute for 3 hours a day, you have time to read text like Arthashastra. M. Shastri is doing commie arguments against our Singaporean bros, Singaporean free market bros. So are you saying, M. Shastri, they have Singaporean privilege, therefore they are being able to write these books and read these books?
But he doesn't sort of micromanage, in the sense that he doesn't tell you what are the types of goods that you need to trade, what is the quantity of goods that you need to trade, and when do you trade, and things like that, right? So that is one sort of bucket where the state is quite strong but doesn't micromanage. The second is a very interesting component, what I call wealth creation by engaging with the world, right? There is often this notion that that we sort of opened up to the rest of the world only post the 1990 economic reforms, right? And there is nothing further from the truth. In fact, for much of our economic history, for thousands of years, except probably the post-independence till 1990 period, we have been constantly engaging with the rest of the world. So there's been trade, there has been commerce, there's been exchange of ideas, people. So centrally to what Kautilya thought about was, he believed in the idea of wealth creation by trading and by engaging with the rest of the world. Obviously, he felt the need to protect some of our interest, but he also believed in the...
I hope he gives evidence for that. I've not read Arthashastra completely, so I don't know the protectionist parts of Arthashastra. I've read a lot of it. I'll finish it someday.
Strongly believed in the idea of sort of exchanging, and
because the problem with protectionism is that it's almost always a slippery slope. So protectionism थोड़ा कुछ company के लिए कुछ दिन के लिए करते हैं, and then you have ambassadors.
And having commerce with the rest of the world. So the second bucket of this is wealth creation through a sort of a global approach. Third is what sustainable growth and welfare. Right? We talk a lot about sustainability, climate change,
and protectionism is not sustainable.
Protecting the environment and things like that. And Kautilya advocated quite a bit for this in terms of protecting the responsibility. But he was doing it through the prism of responsibilities. I talk about familial responsibilities, societal responsibilities. And through this, he advocates for sustainable growth and welfare. So these are three sort of buckets, outputs of what I've called dharmic capitalism in Kautilyanomics. So we spoke.
Rambo, yes, libertarians are absolutely pissed off with Trump for doing this. But the problem is, even if it's a mistake for Trump, they can afford to make that mistake because they are already sitting on top of $23 trillion and a good, let's say, hub of innovation and stuff. हमारा तो वहां तक पहुंचने के लिए भी प्रोटेक्शनिज्म बंद करना पड़ेगा. हमको हमारे लोगों को compete करवाना पड़ेगा धक्का मार के.
Spoke about dharma with definitions of dharma, and then the outputs of a strong state but non-intervening, wealth creation via globalized outlook, and sustainable growth and welfare. So in this book, I sort of map these ideas to contemporary Bharatiya concepts in terms of trade, labor contracts, inequality, all these thematic ideas, and sort of showcase Kautilya's reference or relevance to it. So that was the first part of this research, right? And then in Dharmanomics, what I do is look at this is sort of a sequel to the first one. So we looked at 3rd century BCE. So now we move to the common era kingdoms. So when I mean common era kingdoms, I'm talking about the Cholas, Pallavas, Pandyas, Vijayanagara.
Basically, entire Bhojpuri of churn and land of 7 rivers का exist होगा लग रहा है. मगर ये socialist M शास्त्री को कोई निकालो चट से. ये अब पूरा सबका privilege ले लेगा. अब कुछ दिन पहले हमसे debate भी हुआ है libertarianism पे. किस दिन M शास्त्री? After which live stream we debated a lot. Oh, the day we were reacting to the interview of Michael Malice and after the one we were initially planning to. So in the entire live stream, we debated a lot. We realized M. Shastri is a socialist, and now he is basically making the point that all commies make about all rich people. You have a better quality of life, therefore you are able to do better things, therefore give me reservation. So I think we must do some negative reservation against these Singaporean capitalism bros and tech bros. Okay, if you are come from Singapore to do stuff here, you will have to score 150 on 100, and then you will get a seat at the table.
Empire. And then I extended to also Southeast Asian kingdoms, which means Cambodia, which called Kambojidesa at that time, Champa, which is again Vietnam.
But that's what I'm wondering, that where is the protectionism coming from? Because Chanakya was in favor of this. What's it called? Something advantage, no? Where are the economics and finance guys? What's that term called? Something advantage. I forgot the term. But anyway, that if you are good at making BD, I'm better at making computers, then I'm not also going to start making BDs just for the sake of it, just to create jabs. And the BD guy is also not going to artificially start making computers while sacrificing all that he already has. That guy is going to sell me BDs, I'm going to sell him computers. Competitive advantage, right?
And then the rest of the South.
Competitive advantage or comparative advantage? I think comparative advantage, as far as I can remember.
East Asian, Java and Thailand and places like that. So my sort of thesis or based on my research is that, all these kingdoms also have certain variations of these dharma-based economic frameworks. They might not be a one-to-one fit, but there are sort of different iterations along the way. But the base of this has been the idea of dharma. So then I talk about three sort of components again on Kautilian dharmic capitalism, which you mentioned, because the Arthashastra is mentioned in a lot of these places where they take inspiration from the Arthashastra. Second part is what I define as dharmic ecosystem, which is basically temple-based economies. The role of the temple, we see it as sort of a primarily a religious institution, rightfully so. But beyond the religious institution, there is an entire sort of economic ecosystem that the temple generates or still generates in large sections of Bharat, especially in the villages. So the second part of it is what I call dharmic ecosystem. Third part of it is what I call Srini Dharma. The Srinis were basically corporate guilds.
Srini, you start from the beginning.
Right, that's right. So I give a because the Srinis have a very long history. They go all the way till even some of the Saraswati Sindhu civilization, where there are evidences of Srinis. They are basically like corporate guilds in very simple terms, like modern multinational corporations. So they used to have offices or entities across Southeast Asia, where they are basically corporations used to trade, facilitate trade. But not just trade, they had a much bigger role in terms of the socio-economic roles and political roles. And they used to finance a lot of these, entities like the Cholas and Pallavas and things like that. And they played a much bigger role. So they also constitute a very important part of what I call the Dharmanomics apparatus. So we have the Kautilian dharmic capitalism, the dharmic ecosystem via the temples, and then, of course, the Srini Dharma.
Srini. Now, in the book, you draw linkages all through the book between governance and economics. And that dates back thousands of years. It dates, like you mentioned, Cholas, Pandyas, Pallavas, Vijayanagara kingdoms. Explain to us the linkage between governance and economics in these kingdoms and how it continued for centuries.
Right. So in very, again, simple terms, right? We have the state in general. And then
Rambo. That's the thing with equating EIC with every kind of capitalism, and Western style capitalism will do, and then again colonization will happen. But the problem was back then that it was absolutely true that elite Hindus in many parts of the country, and especially Bengal, did support the EIC in taking over from Muslim kings, because they were fed up with their atrocities, and not just cultural atrocities, because that was going on for 600-700 years. तब तो किसी को प्रॉब्लम नहीं हुआ. प्रॉब्लम हुआ क्योंकि तब भोसरी वालों ने इकोनॉमिक्स पे स्टेट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में भी इतना चुतियापा करना शुरू कर दिया, because that's when elite Hindus, rich Hindu businessmen said, okay, fuck this, I'm done with this. आप आइए गोरे साहब, थोड़ा बिजनेस कीजिए, इन लोगों को डंडे मारिए.
We have the market. Right? These are two sort of pillars of what you call modern economic thinking, right? The state is basically
M. Shastri. So even this person is not going to recommend any policy based on Dharmanomics. That's disappointing. That's a problem. Then what's the point even? Then I can just read Arthashastra, or if unless he gives me a boiled down version of Arthashastra, that's I guess nicer. But yes, that's what I want from these people.
Governments which give, they earn revenue from taxation, they invest in infrastructure, they stimulate the economy in various forms. And then there's a market. So the market sort of works on its own terms, and then there is competition, and then it produces bigger entities, companies, and things like that, and drives the economy. The role of dharma is sort of a foundational thing as viewed through these kingdoms, as sort of a foundational thing which enables both of these to work really well.
So there was welfare state but free trade.
Correct.
And there was this blend.
भाई
That's what
एक मिनट वेलफेयर स्टेट नहीं था. वेलफेयर स्टेट नॉट इन द टर्म्स ऑफ अनलिमिटेड फ्रीबीज, ऐसा नहीं था. वेलफेयर का जो ट्रांसलेशन है वो है योगाक्षेम, which actually might translate to the word welfare, but since it's not a clearly defined policy term, therefore it gets misused. Like fair trade, fair wages, okay, basic human rights. इस नाम पे तुम उसके अंदर कुछ भी चीज घुसा सकते हो. मैं बोल सकता हूँ कि having a mic is a basic human right because I'm a musician, I'm a podcaster, I need a mic. What am I going to do with a mic, you evil rich Brahmins? तो योगाक्षेम करना है, ये एक बेसिक फिलोसफी था. उसका मतलब ये नहीं था कि सब कुछ फ्री में बांटते रहो. तो वेलफेयर स्टेट के नाम पे हम आज का वेलफेयर स्टेट हम डिफेंड नहीं कर सकते जस्ट बिकॉज इन द इंग्लिश ट्रांसलेशंस ऑफ अर्थशास्त्र इट सेज वेलफेयर स्टेट.
Seems from reading your book.
Right.
Mix of the two, right?
Right, definitely. So if you look at it, like there was, because essentially all these are all political players, right? I mean, they're all, even though they were monarchs and they had, a lot of power, they had to keep their, populace quite happy, because that's where the welfareism really comes in, because they want to ensure that the lower halves of sections of society were always sort of not overwhelmed on. They had to be, taken care of. So they had a sort of a welfareist approach where they ensure that, poorer sections of people are supported through a variety of these schemes, or something similar to, I would say direct benefit transfer types.
In spite of wars being fought.
What? Correct.
Please citations. But anyway, there are some interesting welfare-ish things that the government did do, which I think it's not all that necessary today, but it, in a trade-off, unless I nitpick, it's still an acceptable thing, which is that a paper that Niner had brought to us back in the day. Okay, there was a huge flood or famine. We don't know exactly what caused it, but it was probably, तो बंगाल में तो टाइफून्स होते ही रहते हैं, तो कुछ टाइफून वगैरह की वजह से एक famine हुआ था. तो famine के तब उस famine के वक्त बंगाल, which was an administrative unit under the Chandragupta Maurya Empire. So Chanakya is still, I guess, alive pretty much, but we have found seals now which say that from the Mauryan Empire comes this amount of free rice. And when you get back on your feet, when your civilization and your business is up and working again after you have recovered from this famine, you pay back that rice in whenever, as soon as possible, whenever you can, and when you are able to, and with the required interest.
And that's the fascinating thing, right? If you really look at this period during this common era kingdoms, all these guys, I mean, the Cholas, Pallavas, Pandyas, all of them are fighting with each other in some form or the other during various phases. But
Right.
one thing that was sort of common is that their economic prosperity was something which is, underlying economic prosperity was going on fairly well. Because if you look at the early common era period, most of the world's sort of GDP and GDP per capita, India and China were the top countries in the world. So that's why you see that a lot of the action was around the maritime trade in the Indian Ocean, because that's where the game was. And because most of the Middle Eastern trade, this was a sort of,
These are pages from Land of Seven Rivers and Ocean of Churn. And University of Singapore, that's one country and one of those universities who even today are dead focused on merit and nothing else. It's insanely tough to get into and survive in those institutions. Singapore prioritizes merit. You won't believe until you have friends who study there, or unless you have studied there yourself. तो पता नहीं हमारे सपने कब सच होंगे. वैसा ही एक सिचुएशन हमको यहाँ भी चाहिए, because it incentivizes studying more, etc. and for the entire mass. And a few days back, Mystery Sociologist gave me this idea that we can, if not, even if we have to, let's say, eliminate reservations, we can still say there will be scholarships for maybe lower caste people or for poor people, which kind of there are in some form or the other, or some based on some charities here and there. But there will be state-funded scholarships for specific amounts of extra grades, extra brilliant grades. Then maybe we can have a conversation. At least I would still oppose it if it's based on caste and stuff. But since it after all incentivizes even better productivity and better merit, then it's still acceptable. It's still a little defendable. So not the ulta here, which we have today, is the incentivization of bad marks and bad productivity and bad competitiveness.
Of a segue to both the rest of Asia and from the Middle East. So that's why, for example, the Cholas had a lot of their ports on the southern coast, and they were sort of transient trades. I mean, let's take Singapore, for example, right? So Singapore is sort of a central place which takes you to the rest of Asia for a lot of commerce to happen. But much of commerce doesn't really happen in Singapore because it's a very small place, right? Similarly, in a lot of the ports that the Cholas had, it was a lot of these transient ports, but they played a very important role to ensure that the trade and commerce was happening. So it was something that, despite the wars, despite a lot of geopolitical tensions, I think the principles that these...
Yeah, Rishabh, kings, mainly kings, and of course, whoever was the population as well. But income, wealth inequality was very, very different back then, right? So the Baniyas, of course, gave dans and stuff whenever possible. But the Baniyas, the merchants who were taking loans, they came back with the interest payment on those gold loans. So that was an earning for the temple anyway. Plus the king was taking care of it to a large extent, but it was mainly running on good economics of the entire state or the entire society.
Kingdoms had, in my view, were all based on some level of dharmic-based economic frameworks. And I think that helped to sort of go look beyond the political environment.
So the trade that was happening, the trade routes, all this happened while these wars were happening. The wars were happening within the framework of the subcontinent.
Correct.
Whereas when they traded with modern day Vietnam, Cambodia, Kampuchea, or you want to call Kambuja, whatever you want to call it, or Thailand, right up till Java that you're talking about, the wars didn't go there.
Yeah.
Only the trade happened, cultural linkages happened, religiosity and religious linkages happened, but the wars didn't expand there.
Yeah, and also when
until Cholas went there and fucked their shit up because they were harming the business around that place.
People conquered, right? It's very important to understand. Let's take the example of Cholas, right? We all know that Rajendra Chola, which is Rajaraja Chola's son, he went across Southeast Asia and conquered or had battles in many of these places. Kadara, which is Kedah now, is one of the sort of known places. But there's a reason why the Cholas did not rule these places.
Yeah.
See, once you go all the way till Southeast Asia, logically you should go and rule there for some time, right?
Yeah.
Because the underpinning reason behind, one of the reasons behind the conquest, for example, was to do with the guilds that I spoke about, the Shrenis that I spoke about. So there was a guild called Ein Nurvar. In Tamil, it means 500. In very...
Finally, something I've not read in Land of Seven Rivers and Ocean of Churn. But by the way, Rishabh, remember there were massive amounts of foreign donations in the significant temples as well.
It was actually started in Karnataka, but it expanded a lot during the Cholas. It was one of the biggest guilds of those times. They played an important role in financing the Cholas and a much bigger political role. So they were trading. So they had entities across Southeast Asia. So they were trading, and China was one of their major destinations for trade. So they were going through, again, the Singaporean Straits of Malacca belt. And there what happens is the Srivijaya kingdom, which is ruling the contemporary Sumatra, Indonesia. So they had a sort of a tiff with them, where they're not allowing these guilds to trade. On top of it, the Cambodian king at that time was also in touch with the Cholas, and he...
Do you remember I told you all this story just a few days back? I read it in Land of Seven Rivers. And then when we discuss Ash Sarkar and William Dalrymple also, he will come up with stories that I've read in Land of Seven Rivers. Things we never knew apparently until 2024. But anyway, the Cambodian king at that point even sent a full chariot to Rajendra Chola.
He had some geopolitical conflicts with the Srivijaya kingdom. And this led Rajendra Chola to go and conquer, so that one, the trading routes were cleared so that they could, go through. And then the geopolitical alliances that he had with a lot of these kings were also sort of sustained. So that led them to conquer and move. So what I'm trying to say is war and conquering was not the primary motive, right? Cultural exchange became a natural sort of extension of it.
Extension of trade.
Yeah, extension of trade. I'll give you another example, right? So in Cambodia itself, Cambodia is basically what I call Cambodia is contemporary Cambodia, but in the post-Funan period. So when I'm talking about post-Funan period, it's about early CE.
How many of you all know the story of how that Funan dynasty was started? And interestingly, it is similar to the word funin, meaning funny, F-A-N-I, of course. And it has something to do with Nagas, of course. The Naga princess Soma, who abducted and made, who was that king? That Brahmin king from the Pandya dynasty, or which dynasty? I forgot that story. His ship was shipwrecked in that area, and that woman finds that guy really attractive and forces him to marry her, and that's where this dynasty starts. No, am I talking about the Khmer dynasty? Shit, I forgot. Lol. It's probably the Funan dynasty. Yes, Pallava. Yes, that Pallava king was basically he had to marry that Princess Soma under the threat of death. Condinia, yes.
Say about till about 6th century CE.
Geographically larger than what Cambodia is today.
Correct. A bit larger, much larger than what it is today. So during that period, one of the theories is how sort of these Hindu civilizations came about. That is, one theory is that a Vedic Brahmin from Kanchipuram, from a Pallava lineage called Kaudinya, he traveled he traveled all the way to Cambodia for trade, and then he marries a local prince called Soma, and then they start a family and they start this kingdom, right? And that's how this is one of the theories which says that that's how this lineage began.
Like what happened with Korea,
Correct.
The princess from Ayodhya.
Correct.
But that was not done under duress. There was consent. हमारे कौंडिन्या के पास बेचारा consent भी नहीं था.
So what I'm trying to say is a lot of common linkages of people who keep moving around for a variety of these reasons were happening, irrespective of the geopolitical element, and that led to a sort of a transfer of knowledge and transfer of culture as an extent, and that became a permanent presence. Because even today, when you go, right, let's take aside the non-functionality of these temples and institutions, right? But even today, if you go there, the cultural facets are still, omnipresent.
So the shrenis that you talked about,
Correct.
It in this dharmic ecosystem, they existed then. Do they exist now across these Southeast Asian countries?
No, because now, especially after the
Informally.
Correct, informally. I mean, they don't exist informally, but their sort of footprints are there, in the sense when you go and analyze some of these places and try to see linkages of what happened, you would always move into one of these guilds, not just the Ainur. For example, there's another guild called
who are the 500? Ainur is 500.
Correct.
So who are the 500?
It was just a group of people in Karnataka who had started it, kept the name as 500.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't like a specific, it's supposed to be a group of 500 people, right?
Okay.
Put it that way.
Oh, I thought there are 500 trades or whatever.
No, I think the members were 500 people.
Okay.
Nice. Then we can, I think, have a pro Kannadiga supremacy movie, but it will be awesomely made, maybe by Hombale, which will be called 500. What is your profession? Business. Then yes. M. Shastri is saying, what scares me is that 5 years later, the same guy will come back with Dharmanomics 2 and he'll say the same thing, and our generation of Sanghi thinkers will become like, Are M. Shastri, yes. Welcome to our club of the same concerns. Hi, Niraj, Jai Sriram.
Which led them to create the name of 500. And another thing, see, these Shrinis were also, they had their own constitution. Right, they had their own governance.
So they're like,
इसको बोलते हैं decentralized libertarian government. भाई, तुमको जिन लोगों को problem हुआ उस दिन libertarian party से, their problem was not the lack of a vibe match with those guys. But you see, it's not important if they like the things you believe in. It's important that their way of doing things will benefit your way of doing things or the things you want.
Correct. No, I would call them corporations.
Corporations.
Yeah, it's all like sort of a multinational corporation, put it that way, but in a scale probably much lesser than what we are today.
And I bet you they were a caste as well.
But for those times, it was still something that was significant, and they had their own governance structure.
Decentralization.
And each of them had their own sort of unique governance structure.
Decentralization.
And these governance structures are also based on the idea of dharma. like like they used to have certain principles for each of their guilds, how they want to function. Because see, all these guilds are very very egalitarian, right? They were very inclusive. They had people across walks of life. As long as you
Egalitarian today means diversity at the sake of in spite of low merit and stuff. It was not going to be back then.
you had some commercial sort of background, you could enroll yourself here. And then so their approach was very open minded. So that is one of the reasons why they were also quite inclusive enough to go across the world, right, to do a lot of these activities. So their perspective was very different. So what I'm trying to say is the common people's engagement with the world was far more sort of I would say influential long term in terms of the ideas and cultural exchanges than even say what the institutional or the monarchs were trying to do.
So also when you go to these countries, we don't know, for most lay people, you don't know
अरे polymerist, ये सब है land of seven rivers में भी.
how is it so similar to back home?
Right.
Especially for people from South India, when they go, how is it so similar? Of course, people will say, oh, okay, the food, the temples and things like that. But there's a whole ecosystem around that. You have a temple and you realize that there is a lane which is selling jewelry.
Right.
Right? They have rubies and emeralds and diamonds. And you see the jewelry, there is similarity to some of the South Indian jewelry. Right next to that will be another lane where there are craftsmen. There's a crafts bazaar.
Right.
You go further down or you see another gully that linkages. So, the word Shreni is actually also that.
Right.
There are various linkages like this. And this is what runs all through Southeast Asia. Anybody going to these places.
Right.
So when you start talking about temples in the Chola, Pallava, Pandya, and the Vijayanagara and the whole ecosystem around that, it is similar in all these countries, right? So take us through that now.
Definitely, right? Because you see, the similarities are a couple of things. One is the architecture, right? So the architecture that these temples follow.
Those applying modern terminologies and today's political science definitions and terminologies and lexicon on them, that's of course a personal choice. Like that, remember, when we were discussing which book? Yeah, Aristotle's book last night. We were saying in the introduction, in the blurb of the book, the translator has said that Aristotle founded his own research institution in Lycemia or something in some ancient place. But when Sanjeev Sanyal says that Chanakya was a professor of political economy at the University of Takshashila, that commie fucker, to whose video we had reacted long time back, he says this is just anachronism. That's like saying tanks were there in Rig Veda.
Some of them is a combination of Dravidian architecture. Some of them is combination of North Indian architecture. But the temple structure,
Northeastern.
Correct, northeastern.
More than North.
Correct.
I've seen Assamese and
Correct.
those Manipur, Tripura.
Correct, because that's why the Mon Khmer, who are the origins. Correct, they're the ones who are sort of origins of before the Funan Empire. They trace some of their roots to that.
Thank you, M. Shastri. यही तो बात है, यही तो fund करना है. और क्या fund करना है? I'm not saying completely shut down academia. If at all you shut down, then okay, fine. YouTube will take over even harder, and every academic who wants to be an academic will have to hire a YouTuber or an YouTube editing team and stuff to pursue their passion if they're really so fucking passionate. But तुम बंद तो नहीं कर रहे हो, तो ये सब फंड करो. ये सब तो फंड नहीं हो रहा है. ये सब कब फंड होगा मुझे पता भी नहीं है. I don't think they are going to fund this anytime soon, because you know the vibes that come from the Indic-minded scholars that do get hired even today, right? They are the same people who will say casteism never happened because it's written in Gita, or casteism happened because of the British, or casteism happened or casteism didn't happen because it was a Portuguese word, etc. So like someone was saying, Retrowave was saying that whatever groups we had, they ended up becoming a caste. What a tragedy! But that's a tragedy of humanity in general. Humanity is tragic. That's inevitable. That's what always happens. So our goal is to not virtue signal and say that we want to end casteism once and for all. We have to acknowledge the truth. This is not a distinctly Hindu problem or an Indian problem. This is what always happened. This is what will happen even in the future when we get rid of today's caste-based identities and bad behavior. But today they have to their incentivization has to stop from the state. So See, unless the incentivization stops, unless people get almost paid directly or indirectly to not let go of their past professional identities, their past unions, their past guilds, this problem is not going away. And on top of that, we are already having caste-based bad behavior problems even today, which are going unacknowledged or are not getting called casteism. तो पहले वाला सिर्फ सॉल्व करके हमको डिस्टर्ब करके पहले वाला तोड़ना है, बाद में भी डिस्टर्ब कर करके बार बार डिस्टर्ब करके तोड़ना ही पड़ेगा किसी ना किसी को, मगर ये इनएविटेबल है और ये हिंदू प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, ये ट्रेजेडी ऑफ ह्यूमैनिटी है कि हम स्टेटस में भाग हो जाते हैं और फिर हाई स्टेटस लो स्टेटस को चूतिया मानता है कि आज भी ये जो टर्म है देहाती वगैरह, ये क्या है, ये तो वही है. तो yes, you can say they are more disorderly and follow the law less, etc. How are you so sure you would not have done the exact same thing if you grew up in that place? But secondly, cringe content, etc. So art is ultimately subjective. You are considering a piece of art, their reels and stuff, cringeworthy or dehati, just because you don't identify with their consumption pattern. That's 100% casteism. That's how casteism always happened. Casteism was never a call for genocide of some people because we hate them. Casteism was तू कुछ नहीं है, मैं बहुत बड़ा आदमी हूं.
So there are similarities in terms of the architecture, right? So and the grandness of these temples and monuments. Two is what I call the way of life, right? Which you talk about in terms of food, in terms of culture, in terms of exchanges, in terms of festivals, right? I mean, Kartik Purnima, for example, is celebrated across these places because a lot of them were trading from Orissa, or the coast of Orissa and Kalinga and all these places into Southeast Asia. So even today, you find that a lot of these, kingdoms still practice some of these, traditions that we have.
M. Shastri, to be fair, yes, we don't probably need government funding, yes, but ठीक है, एक अगर नौकरी वोकरी होता है तो लोग ठीक, कुछ लोग flourish in that way only कि अच्छा आराम से बैठ के हम रिसर्च करते रहेंगे. But also, even if we don't have funding today, we have at least a guy like Vikram Sampath. I'm sure he will fund it sooner or later, but those papers have to be published in legit journals. Like the one nice thing that Narendra Modi has done. Mr. Sociologist was explaining it to me. I don't remember the exact nitty-gritty details and the exact nuts and bolts of how he managed it, but the result is that a lot of bullshit journals where Indian scholars would go on retracting article after article. India has one of the highest retraction rates in the world in all fields, not just Pushpak Viman in Rigved or Mahabharat, even in STEM. And they would publish their hotshit articles in hotshit journals, and they would say, see, I have 5 articles, I have 50 citations and stuff. किसी दोस्त को बोल दिया होगा कि साइट वेट कर ले, उसका भी उसको चुतिया जर्नल में छाप देंगे. But now everyone will have to compete harder and get published only in the most legit journals.
So the second part of similarities is in the cultural exchanges, in terms of food, in terms of their the so-called way of life that we're talking about, right? So these two similarities are very, very stark.
Sorry for interrupting this man again, but a great point here by Polymerist. But this is exactly what Japan did. आज जो इतना जापान स्टैंडिंग होता है कि जापान वाले हम जापानीज जैसे क्यों नहीं है. अच्छा 10 साल पहले तक तो था कि हम अमेरिकन जैसे क्यों नहीं है. अब उन लोगों का थोड़ा वो किस्म का चुतियापा हो गया 10 साल के लिए, 8 साल के लिए वो भी. इसलिए अब American बनना cool नहीं है. Like I find it most hilarious when people say that why is your English so American? Bro, why is your English so British? अरे British way of English बोलना ठीक है, American way of English बोलना गलत है. क्या अजीब चुतियापा है ये. So this is exactly what Japan did. Do you remember the 2 papers on how Japan got rid of its caste system by ushering in capitalism? वहाँ पे we read who the scholar is, who is he funded by. It's all Japan is institution this institute of Japan, etc. They are funding academics of all races and colors all over the world, going on saying, see, yeah, we had casteism, we got rid of it, and see what a great society we have. आज तो मतलब कुछ दिन बाद भिखारी भी बन जाएगा, मगर अब भी वहां से टस से मस नहीं हो रहा है. और जापान पे आज भी मोनार्की है, उस पे कोई ज्यादा लोग बात नहीं करते हैं. उनका खुद का फंडिंग है. उन लोगों ने ये नहीं बोला कि नहीं, who cares what happens in the West.
put it that way. Third is just
I'm concluding that the good vibes that people get from Japan today is definitely a result, among other things, of the things that academics have said about that country.
the you share when you go to these places, right? I mean, let me give you an example. So I was one of my sort of first people whom I dealt with this book almost 10-15 years back was with Dr. Nagaswamy, late Dr. Nagaswamy, who's a world renowned archaeologist.
No, वो तो एम शास्त्री हम जज कर नहीं पाएंगे क्वालिटी. हम अब हर पब्लिकेशन हम तुम थोड़ी बैठ के ढूंढेंगे. अच्छा ये आइडिया तो ठीक है, अब इसका साइटेशन भी चेक करते हैं, उसका साइटेशन जहां से है वो आर्टिकल पूरा का पूरा पढ़ लेते हैं, उसके बाद डिसाइड करते हैं हाँ ये ठीक ठाक रिसर्च लग रहा है. ठीक ठाक रिसर्च का एक स्टैंडर्ड है कि बढ़िया जर्नल्स में तुम पब्लिश कर पाए कि नहीं, तो वहां पे ही पुश करते रहना है. नहीं तो हाउ आर लेमैन गोइंग टू फाइंड आउट इवन अबाउट दोस पेपर्स और गोइंग टू ट्रस्ट दोस पेपर्स?
He spent decades working on the subject. In fact, he's one of the persons whom I dedicate this book to, because the work that he's done was amazing. So he used to tell me that in Cambodia, every village had a Shiva temple or a Shivling temple at some point of time. But when I was traveling through Cambodia, I think you'd also realize that as you walk through, you will see Shivlingas like every other place.
Yeah.
So,
in fact, you said this, that the Khmers owe their heritage to Kamrup. I'm quoting,
correct,
which is modern day Assam in northeastern Bharat.
Sandeep Sanyal mentions this as well. And in fact, Sandeep Sanyal met one guy in Champa in Vietnam. There are a sect called Cham Hindus. So he met a Cham Hindu professor of history, and he was having tea with that guy, with that man in a street side tea stall. And he said that he said to Sandeep Sanyal that we still consider India our most sacred place, and we believe that after our death, Nandi will carry our soul back to India, where our spirit originally belongs to.
Northern Cambodia, which is today's Laos, used the sea routes for trading, and then you go on to explain about details. Go on.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to say is, in a physical sense, though these temples were not non-functional, you get a sort of a very strong feeling that there is a lot of correlation to where we came from, and it's physically seen, right? And that is another sort of element, because most of these similarities we feel through other experiences, but when you see it in a very stark way, I think it sort of appeals to you even more.
And those who own, I've seen in many of these, like for example, in Cambodia or in Laos, they still refer to as Kamboja.
Correct.
The Indians or the people of Indian origin who are like 4th, 5th generation who have lived there, they speak the local language. They practice Indian customs as well as local customs, but they still say Kamboja. There are people in Thailand who will still say Sham.
Correct.
For when they talk about, we in India have forgotten about it.
Right.
We call it Siam, or we say
in Bengali, Rabindranath Tagore used to call it Shamdesh, Thailand.
Thailand, but they will still use some of them still talk like that,
right?
And it comes as a shock sometimes, like when you're in Bali and the cab driver is like, "What is your caste?" And it was like, "Why are you asking me the caste?" You feel a little, but caste is a way of life for them.
Right.
They have not, they don't practice the some of the casteism that we have in India.
Oh.
They mingle with other castes. They have their pujas, and it doesn't matter.
Right.
They just accept the hierarchy of caste without the negatives of the caste-based system.
Right.
So, and then there are
I wonder why
involved around that. In these places, there are still the flower guy who brings flowers and keeps it. So you spend money monthly on somebody who's going to bring fresh flowers to you every day for your thing. So there's the whole economy around these temples, which you described happening in South India, continues in these Southeast Asian countries too.
Yeah, and that's what I define as the dharmic ecosystem, right? One is the temple as an institution by itself, right? The temple as an institution has its own, say, revenue, because people go into the temple, they pay for pujas or whatever it is. And then there is an entire revenue created out of the temple as an entity, right? As a religious entity. But as an extension of what the temple is, there's an entire ecosystem around the temple, right? In terms of, say, shops, in terms of tourism, in terms of people coming, even today, in many of the villages, right? I mean, most of the villages, especially in southern India, the central sort of engine of economic apparatus is
yes, but not everyone. We will have to make our own caste, guys. We need endogamous, fixed consumption pattern based groups. Only people in black t-shirts who like metal and who are Hindutva 2.0 guys, believe in libertarianism and like Thomas Well and Savarkar at the same time. सिर्फ उन लोगों को जगह मिलेगा और किसी को नहीं.
Major temple, and then there are sub temples around, and they sort of are the sort of underpinning economic hub of that particular region, right? I mean, let's take, for example, in the United States, right? If you take some of these educational institutions, let's take Cornell University or Urbana-Champaign, most of them are basically university towns, right?
Yeah.
But there's one university which is central, and that university basically runs the entire economy of that town, and then that town becomes popular. In a similar vein, but not a direct one-to-one fit, you find that a lot of these temples are already there. I mean, thousands of temples are already there at the moment, and they serve a very important purpose for defining that village or that community. And this is part of what I call the decentralized model, because you sort of decentralize all this to the village communities, and there is an economic activity hub happening because of that. Similarly, I mean, this is, in those times, if you really look at it, the temples played like 4 important roles, right? One is they were, large employment generators, which means because of the fact that they owned a lot of land, there was a lot of employment created because of the temple, right? Not just the religious part of it, but the non-religious part. Second is they serve as financial institutions, right? There's a reason why a lot of the temples, major temples in Bharat even today, are all within, say, an hour and a half from the coastal line. Because these temples were serving as banks and financial institutions to enable commerce. So the temples, for example, would lend out money to a lot of these traders and Shrinis at a particular interest rate, for example, right? And they would use that interest rate for their maintenance or for some other social activity, right? So what I'm trying to say is they played a very important role as financial institutions. They also played an important role as what I call a VC or a venture capital fund does today, where they had the potential to sort of invest in entities and promote some level of commerce. So they had that role as well. Lastly, they had a very important role which happened.
They had the biggest collection of gold in the land, and they gave that loan. Oh, by the way, there was different amounts of interests for different castes. वहां पे कॉमियों का एक आर्ग्यूमेंट है कि वहां पे कैस्टिज्म था एंड इवल कैस्टिज्म था, क्योंकि जितना लोअर तुम्हारा कास्ट उतना ज्यादा तुम्हारा इंटरेस्ट रेट था. ठीक है. Now, this was pointed out by Vivek Debroy, and I realized it from reading Land of Seven Rivers and Arthashastra as well, that actually was because of the amount of risk that loan would be there for the lender, i.e. the temple. Because if a Brahmin was taking a loan, it was for puja material. Okay. If a merchant was taking a loan, it was for making a ship, buying raw material, then traveling to a land, then of course getting the profit and returning and giving the extra interest. शूद्रास के लिए सबसे ज्यादा इंटरेस्ट रेट था, क्योंकि उन लोगों का रिटर्न देने का चांसेस सबसे कम होंगे एंड दे नीड इट फॉर आई गेस मोर सिग्निफिकेंट स्टफ. तो अगर लोन का अमाउंट कम भी हो, इंटरेस्ट रेट उनके लिए सबसे ज्यादा रहता था. नाउ देयर कैन बी वन legitimate critique, of course, that it's broadly speaking it's unfair, because if you are birth based stuck in a Shudra situation, then you are going to go on having pay the extra interest, because you don't even have the sort of social or societal freedom to change your profession immediately. So there's a problem, but the interest rates were not inherently casteist for evil Manusmriti reasons.
Even today is what I call the redistributive role, right? We all hear about inequality, right? In very simple terms, inequality is basically the gap between the rich and the poor, right? So the more the gap is between the rich and the poor, the more people say there's inequality.
No, M. Shastri, वो तो पहले भोसड़ी का टेम्पल फ्री करो, बिना हमरा कॉन्सेंट लिए तुम पहले रास्ते वास्ते बना दोगे, उसके बाद टेम्पल बिजनेस में भी इन्वेस्ट करेगा, किस लिए? वैसे ये जो बैडियो के बारे में बात हो रहा है, इससे याद आया, आज तो पता चला कि सावरकर, एक तो आई न्यू दैट ही यूज्ड टू रीड माइकल मधुसूदन दत्तो, बट I had come to realize that he read many Bengali scholars even when he was sitting in Andaman. After the first round of negotiations with the British authorities, he says, I need some books, I'm a political prisoner. Among other authors, he wants many Bengali authors' books to be sent to him as well. Today I learned, again from Janki Bakle's evil anti-Savarkar book, that Bengalis will know this, that Michael Madhusudan Datto introduced something called Omitrakhar Chando. in Bengali poetry writing. Savarkar was inspired from him and then started inculcating or instilling Amitrakshara Chanda in Marathi poems as well. Then I learned from a hilariously written sort of a banterish letter written to his younger brother, just how an elder brother would speak to his younger brother even today. He says, like basically, क्या भाई क्या चल रहा है, मतलब प्यार व्यार में फंस तो नहीं गया कोलकाता में जाके, and he says, have you lost your, I mean, have you lost track of your time and stuff? Have you fallen for has any of those clever Bengalis stolen your heart away? But don't lose anything else. But jokes apart, I would not have a problem with a Bengali sister-in-law.
Society. So you ideally want to provide support to the poor and so that you try to reduce the gap. So especially, for example, in the Vijayanagar Empire, if you look at the plates in the Tirupati, temple, it clearly states that a lot of these temples were endowment-led financing. That is what basically what happens is a bunch of rich people, say in the community, invest as an endowment into the temple, and the temple and invest into the temple's operational cost and provide.
No, but before that, you mentioned that how do they acquire the land?
Correct.
The reason I'm asking, bringing this in, and I want people to read the book for this reason, is because when the Ayodhya temple was built,
Just hypothetically, your argument is correct, and I'm not opposed to just starting conversations. But you see, since the regulators are in institutions, and institutions look after their interests first and foremost, because every institution is a caste. Remember, they will operate like a caste, and therefore what will end up happening probably is that they will regulate temples with the extra excuse of them being now financial institutions as well, और जो अब तक का जो रेगुलेशन है और जो पैसे हड़प लेना है वो बंद भी नहीं होगा. मैं तो बोल रहा हूँ कि पहले वो बंद करो, उसके बाद वो टेम्पल और कुछ कर सकता है, उसका चैरिटी, उसका बिजनेस में इन्वेस्टमेंट सब होगा. मगर मुझे तो लगता है your way of pursuing it might allow or let the bureaucrats think that now, yeah, it's an excuse to do both. Then regulate them for both these reasons. कि एक तो है casteism हो जाएगा वहाँ पे, या फिर funds misappropriation हो जाएगा, और फिर ये तो financial institution है, करो भोसड़ी का regulate.
And subsequently, there are criticisms which are coming up that, people bought the land for the temple, and then from around the temple, it was bought by people, and the locals sold the land. They didn't get much, and now the value of the land has increased. But in your book, you write also that the locals also benefit when this happens. So,
yeah, that's the beauty of economic prosperity. Buddha, I don't think all temples had Nagar Vadhus. Did all temples have Nagar Vadhus? Because as far as Arthashastra is concerned, I don't know if it happened later on, but there were specific basically red light areas and prostitute houses on their own only, and they were regulated by the government. They didn't have to be associated with the temples.
So first, the land is bought by the temple.
Correct.
And the taxes aren't charged because
Correct.
they know that the local population is going to benefit by a temple coming up out there.
Correct.
So go into that first, and then the endowments which come to the temple.
Yeah. So basically, the thing is, even though these are all monarchs, right? I mean, there are a lot of private land was available, right? I mean, the kings had certain amount of personal wealth, but beyond that, they were sort of supervisory of the public land is available. So the temples had, because of their wealth and their presence, they were able to buy a lot of these properties. And these properties were again, given to people like with tax exemptions, for example, so that they can participate in activities, commercial activities, which over a period of time is supposed to give them benefit, right? And that's how that ecosystem, their argument was that over a period of time, either 5-10 years or whatever, this ecosystem would develop in a way where that area will really benefit from the creation of these entities like the temples and things like that.
So there's birthing pangs for the first couple of years when
Correct.
people have to give up their
Correct.
land.
Correct.
But it benefits in the not just long run. It just takes a couple of years
Right.
for temple activity to begin.
Correct.
In that area. And commercial activity.
Correct. And note that this is.
And Rishabh, that has to be that has to be decentralized, right? Because if some community or if some temple screws up, the effects of that should not be on the entire fucking country. So like Tushar from Libertarian Party was saying that the benefits of a decentralized judiciary is that even if there are activist judges, even if there are Pol Pots, his purview of effect is one village or one municipality.
It's not a 10-year, 15-year project, right? People are looking at thousands of years,
Thousands,
right?
yes.
Because you would, because the religious element of the institution ensures that because it's linked to faith, it is a sort of an eternal enterprise.
Even now, Tamil Nadu gets, I think, I don't know the exact figures, but the religious tourism that comes into Tamil Nadu as a result of the absolutely gorgeous temples which were created thousands of years ago, it far surpasses any of the other kind of tourism that comes in into the Deccan region.
Definitely, right? And not just that, right? I mean, one is the tourism that you talk about. Another is the revenue that temple itself generates, right?
Yeah.
So there is a quite a bit of a strong case for liberalizing these institutions, because then they have a potential of really expanding economic activity in a lot of these places.
In your book, you talk about the labor participation in the economic growth of the Chola Empire.
Correct.
And in this, you talk about inscriptions, which during the Rajaraja I's reign. And just to explain, many people who go to these temples, they don't figure out what these inscriptions are, because if you don't know the local language, or if you haven't studied much, you don't have a guide who explains it to you, you really wouldn't know, because there's just the male temple, male employees or people who benefited. There were temple servants. These are dancing masters, musicians, drummers, singers, accountants, parasol bearers, lamplighters, watermen, potters, washermen, barbers, astrologers, tailors, carpenters, goldsmith. There are so many that you see. Now, why are they carved in the temple? I will let the author explain that. These are the people who are actually working around that temple. So for people who think that it's only pilgrims who go and they put a little bit in the hundi and that's the employment activity that happens around a temple. No, there's a lot more that happens. Please explain to us about this.
Yeah, so let's take the Brihadishwara temple, right, which is probably the most famous among what we're talking about. So when you go to the Brihadishwara temple, on the sides of the temple, right, there are most of these inscriptions are all on the sides, right? There's a sort of a lighting that you see, but of course the script is an ancient language, but much for people who are interested, a lot of these inscriptions are all.
By the way, check out this. This is Devdasi Pratha of ancient Rome or ancient Greece, the temple of Apollo servants. Okay, see, Ghungat Kyaan mein Dilbar ka bhi hai. But what's the movie Troy?
All digitized, right? So you could just do a Google search and try to find them online. And what they do is, you see, they reflect a sort of they provide you a perspective of how people live their lives. And the fascinating thing is there is due credit given for everyone, right? It's not like it's done in a very coherent, sort of sophisticated way. For example, most of the inscriptions start off with a sort of a eulogy to praise, even the kings praise, Lord Shiva.
Good question, Abhay. I think they will operate the same ways that Harvard operates today. But some people say that Harvard is not an university when it's just a hedge fund with an university attached to it, because they collect so much funds, so much donations. It's the same economics, and they have insane amounts of investments here and there. Though it will depend on which local temple has what kind of ambitions. Some temples, if they want to build roads out of the Dan Dakshina, etc., fair enough, money given with consent. And if some temples want to do that as well as invest it in other upcoming startup guys in that locality or inside that community, that's fair enough. Some temples might want to do just that, but it's all with money given out of consent and bhakti. And if bhakti in the end dries up, that's, I think, not happening in the next 100, 200 years. If that dries up, then we already have other institutions as well.
And then go on to talk about some of their activities, how some of these loans were given.
There are some places where there is even a small shrine for the architect.
Correct, yeah.
That's the respect for even that.
Correct. And imagine, right, they had the foresight to do this thousands of years ago because they probably realized that this was something that will be eternal. Despite, whatever natural calamity happens over a period of time. The fact that we are discussing about this today is because of that foresight and an ability to sort of, put this in these inscriptions. which again, these inscriptions, we need to view it in a much wider perspective, right? Because how in general for economic history or economic history research, I take a sort of a triangular approach. One is what you call, real data, right? What is the real data that is available? Again, data going back thousands of years is a bit sketchy, but there are some data points that are available, right? So
And again, Sumanavasti, people get pissed off a little with me. Not to that extent. They just mostly unsubscribe, and I'm fine with that. When I say these things, that today's babus, today's academics are Brahmins of yesteryears. Today's universities are the temples of yesteryears. There is a bit of faith in different sections of academia. There is a large amount of research, and the money management, the place of that institution in society are all similar, and the respect for people working in those institutions are all similar. The arrogance of people working in those institutions are all same. History doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. Remember this. This is what it was in ancient India.
that is sort of the data side. The second is what I call secondary research, right? Which is what your inscriptions across board. What is the overall message that these inscriptions provide, right? In terms of trends, in terms of analysis, in terms of principles, because most of them are sort of prescriptive. They will say that, this king gave this much to this person and this person benefited, he provided a loan to this person and whatever it is, right? But you have to find the underlying message or theme across these inscriptions.
No, Pram, you are thinking only about social science. And social science is arguably vidharma, not even adharma. But our STEM guys are doing a lot better, right?
To derive a sort of a framework. So the secondary research provides you a lot of content for that. Last part of it is what I call anecdotal research, right? You have a lot of these travelers during these times, who talk about a lot of these empires in various travelogues. For example, the Periplus of the Earthian Sea is a very popular book. There's a Chinese embassy notes. The Cholas, when they send.
No, our STEM guys are objectively doing a lot better stuff than our social scientists. But are there some idiots? So definitely, that's the point I was making when I was talking about those bullshit journals where even our STEM guys publish random stuff and then retract it. India has the highest rates of retraction. So yes, those are the side effects of being a poor country in the end. After all, we are a poor country. But the era we are discussing here, that was not a poor country, right? And therefore, we have to compare it with today's prosperous countries.
And missionaries to China, and there are embassy notes which talk about this. And then there are travelogues by Greek travelers, Chinese travelers who talk about. These are all independent people who just travel across the country.
Who mentioned that there are craftsmen, artists, singers,
Correct.
construction workers, cooks, all these people employed in areas around the temple.
Correct. So this is what
It happens even till today.
correct.
There
correct.
are the dhabas.
Correct.
There are the Vaishno dhabas. There are the other dhabas.
Right.
There are medicine shops. There are, activities,
There are same types of things even around universities.
economic activities which were not there
Correct.
earlier.
And just to close that point, right? So the triangulation of research is very important, right? Because you can't just look at one data point and then make an assessment of it, right? So, for example, if you take the Padmanabha Swami temple, the amount of treasure and wealth that has been there in the temple is huge in terms of even contemporary, GDP and GDP per capita. So, using just the data points does not give you, because the lack of veracity of data is not the way to approach it, in my view. So it has to be a sort of triangulation, which I talk about, which then gives you a sophisticated overlying picture of what led them to be sustainable. See, the fascinating thing about this entire exercise is we are talking about at least 2,500 to 5,000 years, right? Which means, within a span of 100 years, we are seeing so many geopolitics.
अरे हाफ कोलकाता बुक फेयर हो गया, उसके बाद ये आइडिया आया तुमको? अरे इतना दिन पहले क्यों नहीं बोला? तो वैसे कोलकाता बुक फेयर तो अलाउ नहीं करेगा, एटलीस्ट मे बी इनसाइड द राइट विंग बुक स्टॉल्स. कोलकाता बुक फेयर वालों को आप कांटेक्ट करोगे तो वो तो उनका तो शेड्यूल पूरा पैक्ड होगा ही अभी तक.
Changes, the idea of a nation state, so many structural changes to the way we live. Imagine 2,500 or even more than that, right? Which means there are certain concepts which are sort of eternally sort of ensured the sustainability of some of these systems, and that again is eventually boils down to what I define as the way of life, because most of even in our contemporary spending. Let's take discretionary and non-discretionary spending, right? Non-discretionary is something that you have to do for day-to-day, right? For health, for those things that you cannot avoid. Then there's a discretionary spending, right? Which spending that you make out of your own choice. Sort of, I would say, luxury items. Most of the discretionary spending is linked some form or the other to your cultural activities or cultural ecosystem in some form or the other. For example, if you want to buy a clothing, right, most of you do it either during, say, a Diwali or during some other major festival, right? If you look at the UPI transactions even today, most of this during the festival period, cyclically, really, the transactions are much higher, which means that what I'm trying to say is, for the discretionary part of it, we still use
Festivals.
The cultural ecosystem as sort of a driver of our decision making, right?
Yeah.
And that extends to even economic choices that we make everywhere else, right? And in the case of India, in Bharat, this is far higher propensity than in other countries.
Isn't it the same in the Western nations? Christmas is where most of the sales happen. Even, I mean, if you see globally also, diamond jewelry, sale of diamonds, that happens at that time. Big purchases of land and all happens at that time. Acquisition happens at that time.
Right, definitely. But the fact that through the year we have so many festivals and so many sort of
Okay.
Ours is, I mean, at least the Bharatiya sort of
It's not one festival. Okay.
Correct. It's sort of across the year. And in the West, see, the amusing thing is that in the West, people have done a lot of research on this. Gary Becker, who won the Nobel Prize for economics, started some of his work on some of these, on the role of cultural discrimination and things like that. George Eccleston, who won the Nobel Prize in 2001 on asymmetric information, he's done work on identity economics, right? On the role of identity and society and culture, and the role of norms and narratives in economic decision making. So what I'm trying to say is, this is not some niche topic. I mean, there's a lot of contemporary research which is done outside Bharat, but unfortunately, we are the cradle of cultural civilization. And one of the attempts here is to also sort of establish a qualitative framework which tries to give you a perspective of what this way of life is. Because if this way of life, which is proportional or has a lot of significant correlation with our economic decision making, can be studied further, then it can also make policy far more effective, right? If you're able to sort of understand this a bit more. Say, for example, the Mahakumbh is happening. So the Mahakumbh will have the greatest, largest, I think, congregation of people across probably the world at one point of time. So this is a great sample size for you to, if there's any policy narrative, say, for example, either the Swachhata initiative or other initiatives, it's a huge sort of opportunity to sort of project your message and get it across to people using the cultural sort of narrative as a positive driver to enable greater policy effectiveness. Then, because the way of life is a thousands of years entity, right? You don't need the state to come and tell you how to do these things. You do it because you are living. Your cultural background provides you the impetus to do it, right? So
Western
it's not like
style capitalism.
some external entities coming and telling you to do it, right?
क्या बात
So
कर
it's
रहे
a
हैं?
natural way of life. So if policy can be aligned to this natural way of life rather than the
Acha.
other way around,
Oh,
where a bunch
bro,
of people sitting in London.
this is the basis, fundamental fucking basis of libertarianism. What the fuck?
Tell you what to do, and the people have to adjust their lives to that. You rather have it the other way around. Then it becomes far more effective because you're aligning to what the people are naturally sort of aligned.
Okay, I'm going to come towards wealth creation in the campaigning that one saw happening in the US. A lot of parallels one saw even in the 2024 elections in India, where there was demonization of wealth creators, crony capitalism, justified, not justified. That, of course,
It was a fundamentally anti-Hindu thing to do, and when Nehruvians did it, not many people had a problem with it. Not even the trads who are Gandhian socialists. Only and only Savarkar would have had a problem with it till the time he saw it with his own eyes. Maybe a few close confidants of his, and the people like in the Swatantra Party and stuff.
It's politics in that. In your book, in Kautilyanomics, you talk about wealth creation, of which Kautilya mentions, and he says consumer is king. Wealth creators being demonized globally. Is that a healthy trend? Are they villains of society?
That's a Christian morality trend. That's egalitarianism.
Even in a country which is like the citadel of capitalism. Explain that.
I think wealth creation is something that one needs to encourage. One needs to because without wealth creators, you don't get prosperity. I mean, let's go back again to Kautilya, right? the reason why Kautilya was a political advisor. So his main aim was to actually ensure that his king retained political power. He saw economics as a tool to retain political power, right?
He saw even annexation as a tool of political and economic power, and which is why he says that annex karna to sab rajao ka dharm hai, because his Arthashastra was sort of a manual for all the kings in the land. I mean, people opposed to Chandragupta Maurya wouldn't say no Arthashastra, who cares what happens in Mauryan empire, nahi padhenge bhosri ka, aisa nahi tha. तो he says that अब annexation तो करना है, जितना हो सके इन्वेट करते रहो, तुम्हारा लैंड बढ़ाओ, better wealth collection, and then we can run a good society and stuff, better revenue collection, and we can maintain a good area of good economics and business, etc. But the one thing he says to those kings is that when you annex a kingdom, your first duty is to learn the customs of that kingdom, not hamper their customs, and in fact go and join the processions with the locals and celebrate their festivals. So yes, this brings me to the question someone was asking, that some historian has said that the life of poor people remained largely the same, whether it was in ancient India or medieval India. That's somewhat correct, but not entirely correct, because yes, it was true that in ancient India it did not matter which king won or lost until it was an distinctly evil or bad king like Ashoka or his descendants and stuff, or like when Shashank of Bengal passes away and 100 years of lawlessness takes over. That's of course a problem with bad kings, but largely it didn't hamper the lives or didn't alter the lives of anyone. But during the 1500s onwards, the Muslim kings started screwing with the economy to a large extent, and that's when poor people suffered a lot more than they were suffering under Chanakya. एकदम exact same था, ऐसा नहीं है.
Sees Artha as a precondition for political power, which means wealth creation as one of the bases, because he believed in the view that wealth creators enhance society, enhance employment, enhance capital, enhance labor, and they make the society far more prosperous, and that prosperity will lead to political sustainability, prosperity with welfareism, right, to ensure that the poor are not left behind. So what I'm trying to say is, even in all these kingdoms that you see, there is a certain, there's no taboo for wealth creation, right? In fact, there's no taboo for even debt financing, right?
एक पूरा कास्ट है सिर्फ wealth creation के लिए, तो wealth creation कैसे taboo होगा?
We talk about moral complexes in buying loans and things like that, right?
Yeah.
Even in the Arthashastra, there are various principles. You talk about how do you get debt, how do you finance debt, what are the interest rates?
Right. And by the way, for those of you who all didn't check our Aristotle live stream last night, I observed an insane thing. Poetics by Aristotle is written in the same way that Arthashastra is written by Chanakya, and they were kind of contemporaries, right? So first of all, both of these works are written exactly like research papers. There are citations of other scholars, past scholars, etc., and a list of things they argue, they agree with on, and a list of things that they disagree with. But there's an extra thing that I had found only in Arthashastra, and yesterday I found in Poetics as well, is that there is a ranking given for every group of, let's say, 5 or 6 solutions. Okay, let's say I say that using this mic is a great thing, and some guru has said you must not use Lewitt mics, you must use Audio-Technica mics, and I say no, I disagree with him. I think Lewitt mics are better for these reasons. But among those 5 reasons why Lewitt mics are better than Audio-Technica mics, here are the rankings of which argument is most important. That this is the reason that Lewitt mics are better than Audio-Technica the most. This is why it's most better. Okay, or almost this is the most significant reason why it's better. And then there's a hierarchy, and you go down in the hierarchy. That's how Poetics is also written. And then he was writing, of course, critiquing different texts and good playwrights and bad playwrights. It was sort of a Homer simping text, Poetics. He says that everyone other than Homer sucked, pretty much. But even if Chanakya ends up advocating for something that he knows, it might not end up happening, he says that, okay, then here's the next best option. If you can't do that, here's the third best option. If you can't do that, here's the fourth best option. That's exactly how even Poetics is written.
Is that you need to pay? How do you ensure that financing debt for better projects is a very much reasonable thing to do as long as it's within practical limitations. So the concept of wealth creation, the concept of using financial instruments to enable wealth creation was something that was encouraged across board, and that's why you see in a lot of these kingdoms
Yeah, Rishi, it's mostly a description of the past. It's just a history book. I thought it would be more of tying it together with today's institutions and stuff.
that common people were engaged in a lot of these commercial activities, which led them to do a lot of things, and that reflects a sentiment which was there among people in general over this period of time where, imagine, right, thousands of years back, you're crossing oceans, right, and going to another place completely just because you want to trade, say XYZ products, right? So if your wealth creators are such a big taboo, why would people want such a life
Yes, God dank. His view of economics is pretty different from RS's view.
risk to go and do all these things?
Hmm.
And why would people want to go to other places to invest and have their Srinis and all these places and do all these, things when if it is considered a taboo? So I don't think.
When did it become a taboo in India?
I don't know. Over a period of time, I think probably more research needs to be done. But at least till the Vijayanagar Empire that I'm seeing here, I don't see a sort of a wealth creation to be seen as something negative. I think probably after independence, because of the socialist sort of
Or maybe the people who think capitalism, credit, interest are haram, they had something to do with it as well.
Undercurrent and inspirations that we had. That
Fabian socialism,
created a
definitely.
time where this was seen as something that one needs to probably cut down on. But in general, if you look at a historical perspective, both engagement with the rest of the world and sort of encouraging wealth creation was seen in it was one of the common threads that you see across these kingdoms. One point which I would want to add is also that this is another example, right, of the Pallavas. There's an incident which I mentioned, which I think is an interesting incident I should share. Is that around 700 CE, 732 CE, one of the Pallava kings passed away. He didn't have any progeny. He was Parameshwaran, what was his name. So he didn't have any progeny, so they were looking for a progeny for this person, right? Some of, I think, of this king's lineage, past lineage, they had migrated to Cambodia about 100 years back. And one of them, his name was Bhimavarman. He migrated to Cambodia, say, 100 years back, and he had a lineage there.
No, God dank. Unfortunately, no. We were hoping for that, but that's not what he does. He is just pointing out how great economics was in the ancient past.
So the Pallava, folks went all the way till Kambujidesa in Cambodia and found this person's lineage through a king called Hiranyavarman. And this king had 4 children. The first 3 children were offered this kingdom. Right? This guy has passed away. You're part of your lineage to come and take over. They didn't accept. But the 4th king, the 4th kid, was an 11-year-old kid, and he accepted it. And he was anointed the king of the Pallava Empire. And this guy
This is also something I learned of in Land of Seven Rivers or Ocean of Churn or both.
Was born in Vietnam, in Champa. He was anointed as Nandivarman II. So the Kanchipuram Varadaraja Perumal temple, which is a famous temple, was actually expanded and really made significant by him. And he is considered to be one of the biggest Pallava rulers of his time. What I'm trying to say is, even in a context of choosing a king, right, the people were so sort of open-minded enough to travel all the way to go and find someone who's born in another country.
And the proof of it is that there are people with those quote-unquote Mongolian eyes. Faces like them are carved in South Indian temples under the Pallava dynasty. Sanjay Sanyal went there and discussed this with the priests. They had other views, of course. I don't remember. I think he said that they had actually agreed with him, but this is the idea that Sanjay Sanyal put forward first. Jup is saying ancient India was rich because all the kingdoms fiercely competed with each other, just like in early modern Europe. Yes.
With a particular lineage and anoint him as the king here to rule them for X number of time. So people perceptions during this, this period
Emancipated, you say.
Exactly, and it sort of percolated among common people as well. Because for you to anoint a king, the common people also need to accept him to be a king, right? So they were this entire openness to engage with people and societies and things like that was a common factor, and I think wealth creation is sort of mapped to that as well.
See, when I was asking you about wealth creation in America and India and trying to draw parallels, there's also, I was reading somewhere that when this person who was talking about it is that when you're growing up in the 60s, 70s, if somebody came to your home and said, what do you want to become when you grow up or something, it was always associated with you want to become a scientist or a doctor or an engineer. Nobody said, I want to become rich, I want to become wealthy. That was you want to become wealthy, well, that's not a goal in life. Nobody said, or it was not encouraged in most middle class homes. So is that an alien concept? Was it there always in India, or was this a concept that came in later with socialism into India? You think?
I think it came in later because you see, in those times, you didn't have. I mean, you obviously you had educational institutions. You had.
Oh,
You know,
Sri ke itna kuch bol diya under mute. Yeah. So I should never mute. That's a lesson we learned today. So what I was saying is, where did you come to a live stream after 2 years of discussing these things? Free market, and free market, and individual rights. Individual rights we already have, but reservations are offsetting the individual rights. So we need free markets, different kinds of job opportunities, and along with that, the state has to stop recognizing caste identities and stop asking you to write your caste everywhere, and of course stop giving reservation as well. So which is to say, they have to stop incentivizing you maintaining your caste-based identity. If you want to maintain your caste-based identity without any government benefit or oppression, government-based oppression or government-based benefit, state-side benefit, feel free to keep it up as long as you can. I don't think it will be you will be able to do it more than 1 or 2 generations, but the state has to get out of it, which is again exactly what Savarkar talked about. But anyway, that free market society will eliminate caste-based bad behavior.
the need for education and having professions such as this. But by and large, entrepreneurship was sort of a vehicle for people to do their own activities besides agriculture. Trade and entrepreneurship was an important sort of segue for people to earn money and do things. So in terms of opportunities, probably it was not as diverse as what it is today. So I think they were sort of encouraged to do this if there was possibility or expansion of possibilities in these areas. But this deliberate sort of toning down of wealth creators, I think that's a post sort of probably a socialistic phenomena.
Isn't
which sort
it?
of
I mean,
creeped
you're
in.
just saying like there are families where it wasn't encouraged among your children to have wealthy friends. You know,
Right.
if friends, if your son or daughter had, and they were of impressionable age, don't mix with very wealthy people or children of wealthy people. No, that's not. You wrong sets of values will come in. So from the childhood itself, it's ingrained that those who are from wealthy families are people without scruples.
So people who hate RSS forget that Deen Dayal Upadhyay wrote that capitalism or any kind of free markets are bad. That's Western style capitalism, because people with the most brains will monopolize the most amounts of power. बुद्धिमान लोगों के हाथ में पैसे और क्षमता चले जाएंगे, इसलिए इसलिए कैपिटलिज्म खराब है. ओके, बुद्धिमान लोगों के पास पैसा क्षमता नहीं होना चाहिए, मेरिट की मां की. That's what you have to believe in. Okay, only and only if you are not buddhiman, only then you deserve power. क्या genius, क्या argument है. वाह 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 वाह.
So that's the kind of training that comes in. Whereas if you see historically, culturally, you have Krishna Sudama friendships.
Correct.
You have stories Raja or Rank, which we've all grown up with. So there is a dissonance there. So I'm just wondering, if it was not part of our culture and heritage, where did that come in? When did it come in? This kind of values.
I think the post-British, environment was that we were so crippled in a variety of ways, right? We were in deep poverty, in terms of our identity, our civilizational identity. It was taken a sort of hammering. So at various levels, we were sort of really, both mentally as well as societally, at a very low phase in terms of confidence, in terms of what we are and things like that. So the expectation was that everything that's going to happen is going to be something wrong. So the security element of it somehow creeped in along with some of the other tendencies over this period of time, where we always want security, and we want to move away from the sort of poverty cycle to reach some level of economic comfort. And the safest way to do it is what we were seeking because of the past, that especially the recent past, which was which we were subjugated to a variety of both external threats as well as internal threats, and it seeped into society because we were extremely poor and we had to come out of it. So I think that also played a role.
Has that conditioning, do you see it, because you're sitting in the US, do you see that conditioning withering away within by India? You have an external perspective as compared to us who live here. So do you see that withering away, that kind of?
Yeah, definitely. I think what I find is, especially over the last 10-15 years, there is a definite change in the approach or the mentality of a lot of the young people, right? The entire startup movement, the entire sort of embrace of Bharatiya ideas. I mean, let's take this book, right? For example, when I wrote Capitalism, I had to wait for like 4 or 5 years for a publisher to say yes to it because I didn't want to dilute the content and things like that. But the book really sold well. I mean, became a national bestseller. But for someone who's not an established author, it was. But what I noticed is there's so much interest. I mean, there is so much interest on subjects like this, and
yes, and also because people haven't read Land of Seven Rivers. But Rishi, let me point out to you what Hindutva 1.0 Gandhian socialist RSS guy would say to you for standing Banya so much. Okay, they will say that, भाई हमारे तो इतने सारे Hindu billionaires है, वो क्या उखाड़ रहे हैं? Therefore, what's even the point of having prosperity or rich people in our society? Because they will turn up like the people who fund cricket tournaments in USA, not to any nationalist cause and stuff. So they don't realize these are the descendants of Congress cronism, or who are the absolutely new age people. They are a bit crony, somewhat crony, but they are a little different from the past Congress cronies. But here they are the outliers. We are not in a situation where it's most people are being encouraged to do these things. मैं ये नहीं बोल रहा हूँ कि encouragement करने से ही सब कोई बिलियनियर बन जाएगा, मगर हमारा सोसाइटी ऐसा नहीं है. हमारे सोसाइटी में अभी तक ये लोग उठ रहे हैं. I don't think present tense is too fair, but up until let's say last 5-10 years, the only people who were able to become this way was because of doing a lot of shenanigans. अब जब तुम शिनानिगन्स पे इतना भरोसा करोगे तब वैसे ही लोग निकलेंगे जिसको और कुछ आता जाता नहीं है. तो लाइक आई हैव हर्ड दिस क्रिटिसिज्म दैट oh yes, these raitas are just about Dharmanomics, no dharma and stuff. तो भाई Dharmanomics का ऑपोजिट तो है, पहली बात तो है भिखारीपना, मगर Dharmanomics सबके लिए होना चाहिए. An egalitarian Dharmanomics, not just for those people who find out connections with the government.
And this is a reflection of people trying through sort of common people who are not political, who don't have any sort of, who are trying to find themselves, find their own identity. And I think gone is the past where whatever that, some white guy says that we have to, think is some, glorified truth. I think people are questioning far more. I think technology has played a very important role because now consumption of information is, so much online available. So the entire prism of NCERT textbooks is gone, right? So most people consume information away from, podcast and things like that, right? I think democratization of information, that is one. And also the fact that, Bharat is being seen more and more as a consumer, as a central superpower, or a superpower that's trying to or a country that's becoming a superpower, the central players in the global game. And I think that makes a very important difference because when you are at the central of geopolitics, then what you represent defines what the rest of the world thinks about you.
Yes.
If you provide solutions for the rest of the world, it again, gains more credence on what you were and what are some of the ideas that you were that made you what you are, right? Because you're seen as a successful, up and coming civilization, not a snake charming, poverty driven, sort of a civilization. So from a Western point of view, or even from a sort of non-political Indian point of view, you are seen as doing something right? So then your ideas, your thinking takes center stage. So that's why my thinking is that a lot of these ideas that I talk about, these will be ideas in another 10-15 years getting center stage. Because if you look at a lot of the issues, global issues, right? Climate change, sustainability, global peace, stability, wealth creation, all these things have lessons from our past, which we can really use and sort of.
And without large scale economic prosperity, so we will never get to a pro environment society. Bhai, poor people can't afford to care about the environment. At best, they'll worship some tree in their locality or some mountain in their locality. उससे ज़्यादा large scale कुछ pro environment मानसिकता होगा ही नहीं. The best way to help the environment is make as many people as rich as possible as soon as possible.
Showcase to the rest of the world how some of these things are done. Of course, not everything in the past is you want to follow, but definitely inspiration, right? I mean, if you take modern day capitalism itself, it is a sort of an inspiration from a Protestant ethic, post the French Revolution. Similarly, the Chinese, I mean, their way of dealing with both economics and society is inspired from their past. So unless we sort of seek this inspiration of the past, I think for it to be sustainable and for it to be sort of enhancing, I would say that is a very important sort of narrative that we need to first understand, and then try to bring some of these elements which we can use in terms of either policy prescriptions or ideas which we can share with the rest of the world. I think India's Bharat's presence as a upcoming global superpower makes a huge difference coming to the mind frame, and so I see that shift, and I see that if you take the say 15 to 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds today and compare them say 10, 15 years back, I think there's a significant difference. I mean, people are far more motivated to be in Bharat. People want to do a lot of things, and there is no taboo, there's no restriction. People, if you're really passionate about something, you go ahead and do it. And I see a change. I mean, for people who don't visit, I mean, who are not in sync with what's happening, probably it's a surprise. But for people who are sort of in the policy sort of space, I think it's quite evident that there are changes happening very fast.
Since you're based in the US, I want to know to what extent did the economic policies of Donald Trump help him get elected?
पहले सिंगापुर में थे, अब बेस्ड इन यूएस. वेस्टर्न स्टाइल कैपिटलिज्म, इसलिए तो ये सब वेस्टर्न प्रोपेगेंडा ही है.
As opposed to Kamala Harris.
So that's a tricky question, I guess. I don't know. I think like in all other political entities, I mean, time, context, situations vary, and I think the United States is a different breed compared to other countries, primarily because 3-4 states basically determine how the.
But this time, all the states. Right?
That's right. I mean, what I'm trying to say is the underlying sort of focus is that these states sort of determine the electoral outcome, and I think in this particular case, I think a variety of issues, to do with age, to do with the economy as well, because even though current indicators are much better than before,
but still the messaging that was done, because Donald Trump claimed that
M. Shastri is extra harsh today. I'm liking this anger and frustration in M. Shastri. This is constructive rage. By the way, Rishabh, I heard that BJP is about to win and stuff. Outravery करके जीता है. ठीक है, बट केजरीवाल से तो कोई होप ही नहीं है ना. वो 60 साल रहेगा, 100 साल जिंदा रहेगा, सीएम रहेगा, फिर भी रेवड़ी देता रहेगा. बीजेपी से एटलीस्ट होप है कि उनका आइडियोलॉजिकल टिल्ट थोड़ा बहुत आजकल प्रेशर में आके भी हो, जिसलिए भी हो, थोड़ा बहुत तो अलग डायरेक्शन में जा रहा है, तो वो किसी ना किसी दिन दिल्ली में आएगा शायद. मगर the problem with freebies is that once you announce a freebie, it becomes almost impossible in a democracy to stop it. So let's see if they will ever stop it with the fear of Kejriwal coming back to power looming over their heads. So not anytime soon, of course, but someday. केजरीवाल के केस में तो प्रॉब्लम है कि वो समडे भी नहीं होगा. अरे बाप रे, थिंक स्कूल में उसका इंटरव्यू देखा थोड़ा 5-10 मिनट, उसमें ही तो कितनी बार फ्रीबी जस्टिफाई कर दिया उसके सामने बैठकर. और क्या नाम है उसका, गणेश, उसको बोल दिया कि अरे भाई तुम तो प्रिविलेज्ड हो, तुमको ये सब समझ में नहीं आएगा. चोंच ले.
Kamala Harris's economic agenda had wiped out 30,000 private sector jobs and 50,000 manufacturing jobs, and he's promised to cut taxes, end inflation, lower the prices, raise the wages, bring back factories to America. Is this just rhetoric, or do you think it actually clicked with Americans? Did economy and economic policies and the promises he made, did that click as compared to what Kamala Harris or the Democrats were doing?
I think so. I think that's what the surveys seem to indicate, right? I mean, the sense is, whether it's rhetoric or not is something that you would see in the years to come.
You've seen his first term, so
right.
how do you?
I think this time around, the general feeling is that while his first term was a bit more, a lot of common people have voted for him this time. So I think
Biden used to talk about him being the working class president. How did the working class move away from the
Biden working class president by 40 साल से गवर्नमेंट में है.
Democrats this time in such large numbers and go towards this billionaire? How did that happen? And he wasn't shying away from that, right? Billionaire, though even George Bush was a billionaire, but he didn't project.
No, Rambo, I'm not that stupid. He's an actual economics graduate guy. He'll just throw some random terminologies and equations at me, and I'll be left hanging with my balls. So, लोगों को लगेगा कि debate ही हार गए. People with actual technical know-how of things debate that way only.
Reject that. Whereas this guy proudly wears it. He had Elon Musk next to him. So why did the working class have more faith in this billionaire president nominee as compared to a working class Democrat?
Yeah, this last half is an entirely different topic. Let's just see what are his views. By the time I will be making the next thumbnail, and we'll come back at 12:30, okay, to discuss William Dalrymple's in the podcast with Ash Sarkar. Okay, by that time, just until then, just let's keep hearing his views.
I think the fact that he appealed to them.
रैम्बो कोई भी लिबर्टेरियन को उसके सामने छोड़ दो, खा लेगा उसको जिंदा.
Far more direct way, in a more consistent way, through his right from when he started his political journey. One of his core focus areas were addressing the working class and the shortcomings of the working class. And I think that consistency and the fact that a successful businessman is able to voice support and also is seen as someone who can be successful in addressing some of their outcomes, some of their issues, is also another factor. And look, eventually immigration also takes a toll, right? In the sense that when people over a period of time, let's say, for example, in your neighborhood in Delhi, right? After 20, 30 years, you see a lot of, say, Westerners around your area, right? Obviously, the people who are living there might feel a bit, not uncertain, but might feel a bit that, what is happening to themselves. And I think these are all subtle themes which have been really expanded, but I think it's primarily an economic issue. And much like in elections, you don't know sometimes. It just clicks. Sometimes it doesn't. And in this case, I think there's a much more broader support from what I'm seeing compared to the previous 20.
I'm going to quote from the American media, one article which said the number of them now analyzing. And it's interesting to see because one tends to draw parallels with the Indian political system and what is happening here, elections of 2024 and then subsequently state elections which are taking place. It says that the Democrats have become more affluent and educated, but that has left the party leaders, donors, operatives, and other decision makers more removed from the lives of the low and middle income workers. Democrats refuse to acknowledge the impact of post-COVID inflation, from which higher income professionals were more insulated, and instead try to persuade Americans to believe abstract economic metrics over their lived experiences of painful credit card swipes at the grocery store. They failed to address inflation, saying that it wasn't a big issue or that the pain of the working people that the working people feel right now isn't real. So to tell the people that, you've got to, the food stamps, people who living on food stamps, that your pain isn't real. We are still the most powerful country in the world. So vote for us. Does that work?
No, see, data and how people experience data are two different stories, right? When you have very high inflation over a period of time in any society, say 3-4 years, at the back of mind, your benchmark is 2019. Your benchmark is not current inflation, which is much within range, which is within your 2 to 3% range, and where it's been brought down significantly, right? But your thought process thinking is not what the current data is. Your thought process thinking is how you were before the onslaught came in 2019. So the psychology behind this is you are looking at 3-4 very difficult years, and that is your benchmark. And solace by saying that the data is things are much better now, but it's still much more than when it was in 2019 because you see it as a cumulative figure, right? A cumulative experience. I think that's where the sort of inflation story went off. And if you really look at the policies of the Democrats in the 1990s, it's like a complete 180-degree turn to what it is today, right? I think a large section of what these people are saying is probably they want to see more middle ground into a lot of these policies rather than being on extremes, or at least create a perception. I think
everyone in the top positions, top ranks of power today in USA are former Democrats. Tulsi, Vivek, Trump, RFK Jr.
Most of it is perception and how that perception was created.
And also a lived experience. I mean, is there a lesson for Indian politicians to learn from this?
Definitely, right? I mean, to be more rooted on the ground. But I don't make any pretensions of judging an Indian politician. I feel that the Indian politician is probably the job of an Indian politician is probably the most difficult job probably in the country because there's a lot of judgmental accusations on them, but the amount of work that they are put to subject to and the amount of request and amount of expectation that they
Yeah,
have.
Vivek Ramaswamy and Trump never worked in ground level. They never handled blood donation camps and flood rehabilitation, etc. How can they be good leaders?
People is intense. I mean, being an Indian politician is no joke. So that's I would say a foundational compared to any Western country, right? Because the challenges here are 10, 100 times more, and the expectations also varied, right? Because we have so many sort of cultural connotations, cultural differences, geographical differences, linguistic differences. So each area, each a state has its own complexities. So it's a far more much more diverse field to play with. But in terms of a lesson, I would say, yeah, one thing is to stay rooted. Two,
The cultural mores also, right? When you become ultra woke,
Right.
it might work when you're talking to a journalist
Correct.
from a metro. But when you actually are with your crowd, with your voter base, it may not click. I think
Right.
that happened with Kamala Harris to
Right.
some extent. When her association with activists
Kamala.
became so strong
Kamala nahi.
that it wasn't probably acceptable. Even in the case
Kamal.
of abortion, if you see, which was a very emotive issue in America, it didn't work. They are ideologically committed activists. You are a politician. Somewhere you need to separate that out. Do you feel that she couldn't manage that?
And probably yes, because of the one thing is that because of the time she had, right? I mean, she basically had 3-4 months to do anything
But
about
$1 billion.
Yeah,
How
I
can
agree.
you mess with that, even if you have that kind of short time span?
Right. I think one other lesson is, whether you're an actor or whether you're a person with mass appeal, eventually you have to be a good politician to succeed. In the sense, an electoral politician. Unless you have those, abilities to sort of relate to what common people feel, and then create simplistic messages. The messaging needs to be, very simplistic and appealable to common people. And I think these factors also played a role.
See, tell me, she kind of almost embraced socialism. The way she had these activists, agenda-driven activists, she almost embraced socialism. Then she gets this $1 billion infusion in the shortest period of time. That obviously means industry backed her quite a bit, as compared to a billionaire who's market-friendly, capitalistic to the core. So industry backs her, Hollywood backs her. So the messaging is taken care of when you have Hollywood backing you. The money is taken care of when capitalists are backing you. Socialists are in your pocket because your agenda is socialistic in nature. So what went wrong then? Why didn't people vote?
Because the messaging you're talking about is with the elites, right? I mean, the Hollywood messaging is for the elites. I mean, whether the messaging percolated to the common people is the question, right? And whether there's a need for change. Just because, I mean, another point is that just because people voted for Trump doesn't necessarily mean that he is their sort of iconic candidate. It could be, given the options that they had, they felt that this was probably the better or the worse, because they had only 2 options to choose. So we can read a lot into these numbers, but I think the underlying impression is that the people wanted change for a variety of reasons, and that's what I would say the results.
So, the inclusion of Mike Waltz and other China hawks in the Trump cabinet, do you see a sharp pivot in the new administration in January when they come in to take a very
कितने साल
strong
से
anti-China?
चाइना वहां पे एकेडेमिया फंड कर रहा है, वहां पे मूवीज फंड करके करके थक गया. सारे के सारे मिशन इम्पॉसिबल मूवीज में रशिया को विलन दिखाता है चाइना फंड करके.
Stand, and will they delist companies, Chinese companies on the Wall Street? Will TikTok be banned? How do you see this happening? Will it be sudden,
TikTok खरीद लेगा.
gradual, or
No.
will it not happen at all?
Like many things with the new administration, I think we don't know how it's going to happen. But I think it's safe to say that the sort of anti-China worldview is something that is sort of ingrained now in Washington, irrespective of the party. I think whether the Democrats or the Republicans, most of the tariffs which Trump had were kept.
In the Biden administration.
So I think the sense of China being the single biggest competitor, I think it's resonated and quite strong. Across parties.
Do you see this even in academia, where in the US, you live in Washington DC? So do you see that among think tanks, among students who you interact with?
I don't see much on from the think tank and the university space, but I think eventually at some point this will also percolate there, because if the politicians have some of these issues, then they would sort of distill down to some of these institutions as well. It's just that over a period of time, especially post 2000 till about 2014-15, China had sort of a free run, right, in the sense, at least with regard to the United States. So their sort of geopolitical competition scene as something that is intimidating or something that was seen mostly
Hmm.
after the Trump phenomena. And now that is, I think, sort of inbuilt into the American political system. So I would be very surprised if they relented on some of these things. But how drastic it is going to be, again, that's something you need to wait and watch.
Do you see any kind of a ripple effect on China, for example? Do you think that Xi's expansionist plans will have speed breakers, or will he stop it?
You don't know, again, how the Trump-Xi equation works. The thing with the Trump administration is, the unpredictability can work both ways, right? In the sense that it can
What we
ensure
saw with Korea.
exactly. I mean, it can be it can be a sort of a threat that is always hanging on your head that could push people to sort of tone down their narratives, or it could work the other way around, where they just say that they've had enough and they're going to go on their own way. So it's a bit dicey to see. But I think the dynamics of the first term, at least from my vantage point, my personal vantage point, personal view, is that it would be something that would extend this time around. But I think one hopes that they would learn from the mistakes of the past. And the mandate now is far wider in the sense, the 2020 win, or sorry, 2016 win was sort of seen as a one-off. But this is not seen as a one-off. This is seen as much more wider mandate for other set of issues, not just on the economy or China. There are social issues, there are other issues that people are
Migration.
Correct. Immigration is an issue. Illegal immigration is an issue. Wokeism is an issue, for example. And then there are societal issues. So there's a much wider ambit, much wider coalition, because a lot of people have supported him this time around. So it'll be interesting to see how
He promised it last time also about I will drain the swamp and things like that.
See, another thing is what is rhetoric and what is actionable, right? I mean,
but this time he's, even before swearing in, he has Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy in this new department which he's created.
Right.
So it's rhetoric. Yes, I knew, everybody knew that he's going to get blamed for this whole rhetoric business. So he's already formed a new department, this Dodge, right? That's how they pronounce it, or Dodge.
Right.
Dodge, I think. So he has this Dodge department for small government. Do you think that that's going to take off immediately, and it's going to improve efficiency in DC?
I mean, these are all well-intentioned or seems to be really aggressive.
Did you all hear the news? There's one NRI 22-year-old guy as well, Akash Boba or something, or Boba. So Elon Musk has hired 5-6 nerd kids to work 22 hours and fuck the shit out of their bureaucracy.
Moves, but eventually the bureaucracy, as you're aware, whichever country, they're the permanent folks who are on the ground, right?
Yes, they are the one who prevail. They are the deep state. They are an institution that looks after its own interests.
So how much of this rhetoric changes into action, and how much of it is an action which can be done within a short period of time, which is 4 years?
4 years, yeah.
Yeah, is a story by itself. So we need to watch how these things pan out. And given how government works, and
therefore in these situations, incremental change can't work. You have to burn the entire thing down.
How governmental institutions can have their own way on some of these things. I would rather sort of wait for judgment just to see how these things pan out.
Because they're talking in terms of very brutal slashing of bureaucracy.
Yes.
Right.
It reminded me a bit about when Rajiv Gandhi came to power in, well, only one term he had, but he was also talking in terms of this, that we need to slash bureaucracy. Every reformist prime minister who comes talks about this, that bureaucracy, we need to lessen it. Bureaucratic reforms are necessary. Police reforms are necessary. I'm talking about India. But once they get into the system somehow convinces them not to make these changes. And then we have in India things like coalition governments, and then it becomes difficult. And then we have continuous elections which take place. So if you're going to bring about reforms, it's going, like whether we had agriculture reforms, anything, there's such a pushback for any kind of reform because nobody likes their area to be. So do you think that he will be able to bring in these brutal reforms?
He will be able to bring in them, or I mean, if he says he's going to do it, he will do it. But question is whether it's going to be successful or not. Right? There's a difference between
why won't it be
promising something, you trying to execute something. Because see, the United States is a very the president of the United States, while he's supposed to be the most powerful person in the world, he is controlled by a wide range of factors. I mean, there's Congress.
Yes, it's called decentralization and states' rights. But in this case, since it's a landslide, gigantic narrative shift, gigantic Overton window shift. So all other Republican politicians in the entire country will have to kind of play by the rules now.
There is Senate, there are the courts, there are various levers, institutional levers for policy to be, to be pushed through. And there are lots of checks and balances. It's done in a way. So that's why even the American electoral system for all its flaws and for all the jokes that people talk about, it's designed in such a way because you want, I mean, if you really think about it, right, it's all those 50 states or 50 plus states that basically determine they have their own electoral systems, and they come to an outcome, and then there's no central sort of election commission sort of a shop.
Yeah.
But it is designed in such a way that there is no, if there is a demagogue or some,
that no one can fuck up the country too much. You can fuck up the country a little, and for some years, but not forever and not completely. It's not a system that's dependent on bad people or good people.
Dictator, that person cannot control everything. I mean, that's one of the
8 साल लगे वोकिज्म का लड़ा लगाने के लिए.
primary prisms with which the American system was developed.
Checks and balances.
So, and the checks and balances are very, significant, right? I mean, if you don't have, say, for example, control of both Congress and Senate, the president is literally a dummy in the sense the only thing that he can go beyond these two guys is on is on executive orders or something of national security concern.
But he has now control of both the houses.
Correct. So even then, you need,
yeah, we know this stuff. So let's end the live stream now. I'll come back in 3 minutes. I might be 1 or 2 minutes late, so forgive me for that. I'll just take a 5-minute break and come back at 12:30 or 31. Okay. See you in the next live stream, guys.
যদি সবাই ফিরে যায় ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায় যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায় তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে যদি আলো না ধরে ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা জলরে একলা চলো একলা চলো একলা চলো একলা চলো